Welcome and thank you for checking out today's episode of the Auburn Daily Podcast and Show. If you are on YouTube, it has been a long bye week. I mean, it felt like that bye week was about as long as the off season, but guess what? We are back. Got a big game with LSU, got a big game in Baton Rouge this weekend. So, a lot of stories happening. Wanted to go back and reflect on a little bit of Auburn LSU rivalry and some of the craziness that has been over the decades. And we brought in a very special guest, none other than the biggest Auburn historian ever,
Yep,
the
it's
king of
official.
nostalgia, Jeremy Henderson from the War Eagle Reader.
Thank you for having me. And you're absolutely right. Um, Biggest, best, there's a lot of things you could throw out there. But no, thanks a bunch. I do my best. So yeah, and a lot of the best that there's a lot of meat to work with Auburn and LSU over the years. And I have.
Right.
And
So let me ask you, as like I said, the king of Auburn nostalgia, what is your first memory, like your first core memory, Auburn LSU?
Vomiting.
Oh, great start. Same.
The first, I mean, whatever. I'm sure I was aware of them, obviously. But the first memory, the first Auburn LSU game that I remember, was the 1988 game, and I was 9, and we were having Pizza Hut. It was Dad and I had ordered in. I had an uncle there, and we were awesome. It was Pat Dye's era. It was 1988. We were undefeated. We weren't going to lose any games ever again, and we lost at the last second, or seemingly the last second. Um, and it was like, I mean, it was basically being told Santa wasn't real, but like on Christmas morning or something,
Mhm.
and and which is probably when a lot of people learn. So maybe that's not a good analogy, but anyway, it was it was the first time, maybe the only time I've ever like thrown up basically from a football game. It was because we weren't supposed to lose, and we did, and it was just such a kick in the gut.
Yeah, the
And
final score of that game was 6-7.
7, yeah, yeah,
Mhm.
yeah, 7-6, and I went up, and Dad found me hunkered over the toilet, dry heaving. So because it was really bad. It was like I was it hurt. It hurt. And of course, then that one, in the fabled lore, that one's pretty much up there. Um, but should it be? We'll get into it.
Yes. So
I mean,
that one
that's
was
one of
in
the
back.
big ones. You have
Yeah.
all the, well, it's crazy, and then that's kind of like when the I mean, there were a lot of wacky games. Obviously, there's been tons of wacky games, but that's kind of one of the early ones that
Yeah. So
people
that
talk
was
about.
right. And before that, they hadn't played. It was 81, 80, and then 73. So there'd been a lot of gaps in this Auburn LSU rivalry. Then you go back to the 60s and 40s. So really, the Auburn LSU rivalry, as it really started blossoming, would say in the late 90s, and then really peaking in the Tuberville era and rolling through there. So what were some of these notable games? And kind of the context of all this is all these LSU games with Auburn, there'd always been some weird quirk. Like they were just very, very memorable for one reason or another. Earthquakes, fires, natural disasters of all sorts. Tell us about some of those throughout history.
Yeah, well, I mean, right, and well, so one of the things that I've, last year I wrote a story for Auburn Magazine that I just tweeted out at that little address down there, if you want to go to it on Twitter and find it. But a story about the '96 game, the barn burner. My headline was "Playing with Fire." I thought that was pretty good. But yeah, the '88 game. People go, the earthquake game, and so years ago, like,
but that was the vomit game for you.
say what? Right, that was the vomit
Yeah.
game. Yeah, that was the toilet bowl, as I called it. Uh, the I that was when I did a whole bunch of research on. And usually, like, when I do research on something, I mean, you can take it to the bank. Like, I've covered every base and yada yada. But I've recently learned I wasn't quite accurate on my assessment of how this kind of legend and almost folklore kind of like got going. But it's still close enough for me to speak intelligently on. And I've actually just done a little bit more. I'm going to have to tweak things. But the 88 game, again, Auburn was undefeated. We had national championship aspirations. Had we won, chances are we would have ended up playing Notre Dame at the end of the year in some whatever bowl. I don't even know what it was. But we lost. We wound up, I think, 10-2. We lost to Florida State in the Sugar Bowl, but we probably would have played Notre Dame. Probably would have beaten Notre Dame, and so that one kind of hurts. But the gist is that, oh well, it was such a big deal, at the moment, and the fans erupted and the stadium shook and yada yada, and so we called it the earthquake game because it registered as an earthquake on the seismograph. And all of which is kind of sort of technically true to an extent, but it's kind of it wasn't immediately, or at least nearly as immediately understood as this kind of anomaly, this you know uh, pageantry encapsulating lore defining moment. It developed. So, as when 2013, so we have the kick six or the miracle in Jordan Hare. I mean, those things branded within like, an hour or something. The first reference to something being called the earthquake game, that I can find is like 4 or 5 years like after the fact. Now, I was unaware because of all the stuff I'd been able to find before a lot of records kind of got digitized. Was I didn't think that really the fact that it had registered, that moment had registered on a seismograph in their geology test facility or whatever in Baton Rouge. I thought it had only been only a couple of years, or it had been a couple of years before that story actually got out, because the scientist who did it had like printed it out and like framed it as a little novelty for people walking by, being, oh, isn't that funny, kind of a thing. Um, I've since realized that the fact of that it had registered on the seismograph did make one of the AP Wire stories on the game. But it's still, even after that, it didn't become this huge thing until ESPN Game Day came and took it. That was LSU had been one of like the only teams to be on ESPN for like every year for like it'd been like 10 years straight, or they had recently set some record or something for like being like the most the most ESPN team in the country. And anyway, so ESPN came, they did a game day thing. Somebody pointed them out the seismograph. They turned it into a little like feature, and then from that point on, boom, it really became this thing. But it wasn't like, it's almost cast as a this immediately perceived phenomenon or something, like, oh my gosh, like you could
Yeah, it
feel
wasn't
the
like they were
things.
talking about it. They weren't talking about it Sunday. It took
No,
years
right.
yeah.
No fans except maybe the people, I think that story came out like the Monday afterward or something, but like no fans the next day were like, OMG, were you there for the earthquake game?
Right.
Um,
It's kind of like an ESPN manufactured.
yeah,
I mean, it's got its own
it,
Wikipedia page.
it was right. And it had been turned into, I mean, people were referencing it slowly, over, I saw, but it was usually only when Auburn would go back to LSU. Like it wasn't like, and the thing is, I mean, as exciting as that game was, and it was because Auburn was ranked so high, and it was, yada yada on the last second thing. I mean, the next year's game, the '89 game, was just as dramatic. LSU's coach at the time, I can't remember his name, but he basically came out and was like, well, this was just like last year, like only Auburn came back and we won in the last seconds.
Mike Archer.
Mike Archer. And we won in the last seconds. And so, but nobody then was like, OMG, we're having our own earthquake. Now, the irony, I'll go ahead and just, cut ahead here, is like we have a seismograph. Well, not we, but like there is a seismograph, like the instruments are so much more powerful now. But that's the other thing. It's almost this implication in the story that was the thing that made it so good. And maybe I'm being like a jerk and being like ruining things. And again, the whole, Santa's and real kind of a good deal. But there was the idea, I mean, had he gone back, he probably could have looked at, there probably were several earthquake games in LSU at Tiger Stadium's history. You know what I mean? They're probably like, there's always going to be, I mean, because the sensor was, I don't know, a few hundred yards away from the stadium. Like you're always going to have that thing. The
They set one off
implication
in
is that
2013, didn't they?
right. The Iron Bowl. I
Auburn.
remember somehow I connected, and there's a guy in Alabama who was like, "Hey, it totally registered. If you look here, I mean, all these waves correspond exactly with the Iron Bowl." And then even in 2017, the same thing happened. Like we got, so that was that's it's kind of the thing. And if it was an Auburn, if it was an Auburn win, I wouldn't be saying anything. I'd be like, "What are you talking about? There's only one earthquake game," kind of a thing. But since it's LSU, I can kind of just come out and be this implication that it was this one-off, just supernatural thing. Just isn't the case. There's probably like there's probably like hundreds of earthquake games.
Yeah.
I mean, like a year.
Right.
Anyway,
Take it away from them. Now,
yeah, exactly.
Jumping forward here, obviously after that, you get the dramatic 89 game, and then even 92, the time they played after that was 30-28. So you kind of have these pretty close, and this is, I think, kind of the theme for the LSU Auburn rivalry games. But let's kind of fast forward to another one. Unfortunately, another Auburn loss, an odd game of 15-19 in 96. And that was the barn burner, correct?
Yes, and see, I would have jumped ahead just then too. But then I'm like, I'm going back in my mind, and we've associated, it's like a weird rivalry because of like, the wacky, things that have happened, and because of the fire and because of the earthquake, and then even in 2004, a lot of people forget because of like Hurricane Ivan was actually
Yep.
like heading our way, and Saban was trying to
Hurricane.
get out of playing. But but it wasn't just the rival. 94. I mean, if you want actual on the field stuff, the 94 game is the weirdest one ever. I mean, we have three touchdowns, three pick sixes in the fourth quarter. I think they were all in the fourth quarter. Or no, I think there were four. Three were picks. I don't even know. I mean, it was that. Have you? I mean, you're younger than I am. I
Yeah.
assume you have seen the highlights of the 94 LSU game. I mean, it's crazy. The offense couldn't do anything with the ball. It got Curly Hallman fired. Um, I mean, they didn't need to be throwing the ball. They kept throwing the ball, and Chris Schelling and some other Alvin somebody. I mean, it was
Okay,
crazy.
I got it pulled up right here. They had 5 fourth quarter interceptions.
Five.
5.
I mean, in terms of like weirdness, I mean, it's like punt Bama punt level in terms of just the unlikelihood of that in that span of time affecting the game the way it did. I mean, it's
And it says right here, I got the Wikipedia page pulled up on this game. It said multiple players were hospitalized for dehydration. After the loss, LSU quarterback Jamie Howard received multiple threats.
right. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. I mean, it was seriously, it was, sorry, I gotta adjust the phone there for a second. It was absolutely wild. My dad, I was also there. My dad and I were watching that one, and my biggest memory of that is, I mean, we just couldn't believe it. Oh my gosh! Oh, we did it again. Surely not. Oh my gosh! And then when we went ahead on that touchdown, my dad stands up, probably from another Pizza Hut pizza. We eat it on the floor while we're watching, and he stood up and ripped his shirt off, ran out onto the deck, and just starts beating his chest and screaming "War Eagle." I mean, it was straight up. I mean, it was wild.
Just Hulk
Um,
style.
yeah, and I mean, so that one was crazy. And again, it stinks that
Okay, sorry for the interruption. Now we are 0-2 for guests having some type of technical disruption mid-show. Jeremy's phone actually overheated, telling the story of his dad ripping his shirt off and beating his chest. Obviously, that story was just too hot for the stream. The phone couldn't take it. The
What?
technology couldn't take it.
Well, it
But
was either that or it was the LSU, like the curse. I
yeah,
mean, I mean, didn't want
weird,
us talking
yeah,
about it.
weird stuff always happens on LSU. Now, before we get to the barn burner, I want to talk about Mike. You kind of mentioned your first core experience with LSU. I want to mention mine. And I explicitly remember, and I'm sure there were games it's kind of similar, watched with dad that just don't really necessarily sink in as a kid. And I don't necessarily remember the game itself because this is not a one we want to remember. But of course, 03, Nick Saban's first natty, wish had been his last, should have stayed at Miami. I digress. But I remember that game was just an absolute beatdown. Remember what 03 Auburn was supposed to be and what they were. It was a 7-31 loss in Baton Rouge, of course. And I'm in sixth grade. And I remember there was a kid in first period English who sat in front of me. And he had one of those kind of like airbrush, like Tiger Rag style shirts of the early 2000s. RIP, love those styles. And it was just some just like condescending, like awfully animated, like we just beat your, you know what, in Baton Rouge with like a Mike the Tiger, like holding Albie like by the throat type thing. And it was, just 7-31. And I just remember staring at that shirt. I feel like he wore this shirt every other day because I just remember seeing it and he sat right in front of me. So I'm just like looking up in English class, just having to stare down this just like horrific Auburn score,
Mm.
which I mean, it felt like he wore that, I mean, for months. And I just feel like
I
just
mean,
that,
he probably did.
yeah, I mean, just had that ingrained in my head and just was like, why would any human wear that stupid shirt wear that stupid
Human.
shirt of that score so often?
Yeah.
When I say it, I mean, it was definitely like, he probably wore that shirt. I'm not being sarcastic when I say this. He probably wore that shirt over 30 to 40 times throughout the school year.
Yeah.
It was it
Sounds
was
about right.
egregious. Don't know if it was washed or not. LSU thing,
Well,
probably
see,
not.
that's kind of like a perfect little thing. I mean, we, and I know you mentioned some, I guess the implications, or that you wanted to talk not just the past, but I guess the future possibilities related to the rivalry. But that's kind of a humorous maybe example of to me. I think we can I go ahead and jump ahead a little?
Yeah, but I don't want to get too far ahead. So give
Well,
a little
not too far
teaser.
ahead, but well, okay. Just remind me about the shirt. We'll keep going.
Okay. But that shirt's a great segue. So seeing that shirt so often back then was infuriating. Like it very much invoked anger. As a young child, it kind of pissed me off, gave me a good reason to hate LSU. And something I didn't have back then that we do have today was Rage Room. And
Mm.
seeing that shirt so often, being reminded of that game, made me want to go to a Rage Room. But thankfully, not only do we have Rage Rooms, but they sponsored the show. There's one in Birmingham, and there's one right down the road in Auburn, right between Auburn and Opelika.
Been
And
there.
yeah, and if you do see, yeah, well, it's great. Glad hope take the family, take the friends, but
Mhm.
do have games like that, and you see other fan bases wear shirts, rather than just internalize and compartmentalize that pain and let it follow you into your 30s from middle school, just go to Rage Room and get it out immediately. You can book it online. You can call them to book. You can walk in on weekends. You can get a table full of stuff with bats, hammers, and mallets, and you can just beat the crap out of it. And I don't know how that could not make you feel better after a tough Auburn loss. Turn it, just turn the page of it, because the good news is you walk out of that Rage Room, just how Auburn walked out of Baton Rouge that year, and then they got them in 04, then you're not mad anymore.
Yeah.
So want to thank them for sponsoring the show. And for those who are listening or watching, go check them out right in the Birmingham or the Auburn Opelika area. It is a ton of fun. And hopefully the game this weekend will not invoke that type of feelings in Baton Rouge and be a 7-31 game. But I don't know if
Well, funnily enough, that was the cover of the LSU, or I mean the ESPN the magazine cover, with Auburn predicting Auburn as the #1 team in the nation that year. The word
yeah.
rage,
Yeah, that's right. With
Torbor, and
was it
was it Reggie
DDD?
Torbor and somebody else?
Was Caridi
Maybe,
on there?
maybe can't remember.
Yeah, it was I mean, you're right. That was I mean, that is an all-time Auburn picture right there of just the rage. Like I think it was like Some Can Turn It On and all. It was
Yeah.
whoever took that photo deserves just all the money. So But let's jump back a little bit before we jump too forward. So I mentioned 2003. Let's just do me a favor. Let's not bring that game up again for this rest of the show. Still kind of hurts. But let's go back to 1996, arguably one of the more famous games.
Yeah,
The
well,
barn burner.
right, and in terms of again, the weirdness hadn't, is the branding of the wacky rivalry is mostly related to not the on the field kind of stuff, but off the field, just
Right.
weirdness and earthquake and even natural disasters. Once you tossed in the looming, Hurricane Ivan in 2004 and everything, but of the most immediate okay, this is screwed up kind of a thing. I mean, that was 96. And I loath though I am to admit it, I had kind of gotten into some other things as a teenager, late in my high school years. I guess that was my senior year, and was more interested in girls and stuff than football at the time. So I wasn't completely keeping up with it. But I remember going to this girl's house, and there was this party, and they're like, oh yeah, with the football game's on. I'm like, oh, that's cool. And it was like I was watching Backdraft or something. I was like, what? Why? Why is the stadium on fire?
Normal
and
question.
and I mean, I was just kind of like, this is weird. I mean, everybody was kind of talking about it. Oh my gosh, like if you heard, look what's happening, look what's happening. And so right. So there we go. We lose that one. I did a story last year, like I said, and I think there was a big mystery at the time, and it wasn't just like the barn that burned down, the old arena and basketball thing, which and I should have gone back and read the story, but you could do it. It's on Auburn Magazine's website. And just Google around, and but and I talked to some of the firemen who were there that day. One of whom was actually one of the Eagle handlers, which is hilarious. Like he was on call and basically had to like put the Eagle down and go pick up a fire hose to save the Eagle, basically. But
Mhm.
so yeah, I mean, of all the weird things that happen, I mean, the
'Cause the eagle
visuals.
back then, the eagle cage was in pretty close proximity.
Well, yeah, but I mean, he was in the game. They were in that. But yeah, no, you're right, right. Yeah, yeah, that's a very good point.
Right. I mean,
Um,
the actual where the eagle used to live on the green space
yeah,
while
yeah.
snowmating.
The aviary. Yeah, it was it
Mhm.
was it was right there. And I mean, and a bunch of cars were like damaged around. Like you kind of forget about the stuff. A bunch of, I mean, like tires were melting nearby. And basically, I mean, like we didn't. It was kind of wink, wink. They pretty much know how. I mean, they know how it happened. They're pretty sure they know. I think there's actually some, maybe names somewhere on a piece of paper somewhere. I don't
Well,
think charges were filed or anything, but I kind of was like making the fireman, the guy, be like, hey, it was an LSU fan, wasn't it? Like they were doing their like weird voodoo stuff.
right.
And he's like, yeah, sure, if you wanted to be that way. But it had been raining. There were a lot of people who were grilling and stuff under awnings, under maybe certain areas you might not be normally. And but it's just absolutely crazy that it wound up that way. And funnily enough, during the research, I saw something about how Dean Foy, or it wasn't Dean Foy, it was someone else. But anyway, but when they were, they used to play basketball games in the old, in that the place that burned, and it was basically like, do not bring in cigarettes to this place. This place could burn down.
Well, you would think with how old it was, there'd be so much asbestos in there that it would just be like essentially burn proof.
Well, and well, it was like it had been on a military base actually, and I can't again. I should have gone back and read the thing. I mean, I'm getting old, so I don't retain it as much. But we had basically like it was like a military, it was like a post World War II like Kwanzaa hut type situation, and that we like repurposed and like shipped over here from, I think, you know what? I think it may have actually been it was either from Louisiana or Texas or Mississippi, or it was somewhere out there that it came. They were doing a lot of that thing and taking advantage of all the materials that we had to work with. But anyway, so yeah, that of all the ones, the 96 one, I mean, was technically like the wildest in terms of like weird things happening at a game that you were aware of actually happening at a game, not on the field. Well,
Yeah, I mean, you
field
see
94.
plumes of smoke in the background, a building burning down. For those that don't know, it was where the parking deck is between the Plainsman Park and Jordan Hare is about where
Yeah, I mean, it was
where it was.
really it was really close. Like people, I mean, it was kind of like like, do we evacuate? Like, what do we do? Because it was very close, and I mean, that thing those flames were going really high, and it was a big blaze. It was
Just
like the biggest one in Auburn that any of the guys fighting it had ever faced.
yeah, I mean, we see like a quadrant of Haley Center just set ablaze mid game.
Yeah.
Now, jumping up some other weird ones, you had 99, of course, which was the infamous cigar game. If anybody follows Cole Kubelik on Twitter, you cannot miss the picture of him and Ben Laird ripping those cigars in the middle of Baton Rouge. And why that game unfortunately lived on in infamy was because up until Brian Harsin, as painful as that is to say, that'd been the last time Auburn had won there. So that was just like a cloud or a monkey in Auburn's back that had just been hanging for way, way too long. And then the other just kind of weird game that just changed for external factors was the 0-1 game, which had to be rescheduled because of 9/11.
Forgot about that one.
Yeah, December 1st, and that might have been one of the latest regular. I can't remember. I know they had one in, I think, COVID, a regular season game in December. So that might have been one of those. But yeah, you had to change that one around. So there's another just kind of weird
Yeah, I mean
deal.
that one was a weird one. They haven't been like spectacularly brandably weird
Yeah,
in a while.
you don't want to like you don't want to remember that one as the 9/11 game. Let's be honest.
Right. You don't want to do that. And then, I mean, the cigar game was probably, I guess, the last one that like has a name for it. The 04 game was so good and so close and obviously dear to our hearts because of what an incredible year that was. And then there was the Ivan component and Saban was trying to get out of it. The 2006 game, I a little factoid about me. And so, I mean, I wish I could get down there this weekend. I've gone to several LSU games. I'm not one of these every game kind of people, but I have gone to a bunch of them. I've never seen us lose. I've never gone to an LSU game that we've lost. And that includes the one that was turned around. I mean, so there've been some, the 06 game. I remember everybody talks about how physical that game
It was
was,
a slugfest game. Yeah, I
and
remember
and it
everybody.
was, and I was there for that, and that was awesome. The 2010 game. I mean, Cam,
Great one.
the Cam's big moment.
Yeah,
I
I
was
mean,
there for that
You had Cam's Heisman moment that
Heisman
game.
moment,
Mhm.
and that was, I mean, that was spectacular. The 07, I mean, there was that weird game, I think in 07, where freaking Les Miles should have called a timeout, and all of a sudden rear to kick a field goal, and all of a sudden like rears back and
Yeah,
and
they did
and
that Mad Hatter stuff, and in 07 too, LSU loses 2 games and still goes to the national
still
championship.
goes right. I mean, like
Right.
there's all yeah, there's all this I mean there's a lot of weird little things that are still kind of happening. I mean, again, the game that we had, I think it was 2014. No, 2014 we killed them.
Yeah, 2014 just obliterated them.
2016.
16 was the loser leave town game.
Well, that was the one where, and I was like, no, I've got my daughter here. It's her first big game. We're not going to lose it. I know the seconds just ran off, and I know they scored a touchdown, but surely something's going to happen because I don't, see us lose LSU games. And lo and behold, Gus starts jumping up and down. The refs. That was the one. That was the one where they didn't get the playoff in time,
Right, yeah,
and it was turned. It was, and that was, God, that
yeah.
was.
This Les
I know,
Miles
I know
clock
people who are like,
management.
well, I hate losing, winning that way. I'm like, no, I love winning
Les
against
Miles was
LSU. Are
fired.
you kidding?
Les Miles fired right after that game.
Right,
I
right.
mean, I think that was almost like a tarmac type situation of like Les Miles had
Yeah,
to Uber home. So and
right.
there was another game before we get too recent in the history, then talk about the future. But I remember you had told me about this once upon a time. But wasn't there a situation where an LSU fan in the upper deck tried to heave like ice from a concession drink at the Eagle while it was flying and got arrested?
I mean, that's possible. You would always hear horror stories about people going to Baton Rouge, getting, urine dumped on them, kids getting rocks thrown at them. I mean, I would hear that from everybody. I think, now that you mention that, I think there is. I can't remember exactly the specifics of it, but I know there was something with the Eagle. That was one of the reasons they back in the 70s and 80s, they wouldn't take the Eagle. I actually saw this the other day. Uh they wouldn't take the Eagle to Baton Rouge, um because I'm pretty sure I saw this because they were actually worried just about like somebody doing something to it.
I think they eat
Um,
eagles down there. I
the
mean, it'd be
another weird,
tailgate food.
if you want to toss in another weird little Auburn LSU thing. I mean, the 72 game. That was the only game the Amazons lost. And they all talk about how it was like should have been one of the easiest games, that LSU wasn't good, that they were like so much better. It was this weird fluke. It was raining down there. And they all just talk about this weird, like, something just like kept them from like winning the game that year. And but that's the only, game we lost that year. And then wasn't 13, wasn't that
13, so 13 was the monsoon game, and that was the only regular season game that team lost.
that was LSU, right?
Right, yeah, it was LSU, and it was just, I mean, pouring. I mean, God was just dumping buckets of rain down, and
Right, so that was another one. So that is a weird. I mean, there always just seems to be
well, let's
some
get a let's
extra
get a
angle.
let's get another one. The worst modern historically performing team, Auburn 2012, almost beat LSU coming off of a national championship runner up. And,
Sure.
it's just the worst
Yep.
team in, modern Auburn football history takes it down
Yeah.
to the wire 10-12 with LSU at home, and LSU, like I said, coming off of a natty. So, I mean, that was
Yeah.
just
Add
kind of
that to it.
weird, like, I mean, that had kind of everybody's emotions like, well, we're really bad, but we almost just beat, like, what is this? And obviously, that unfortunately that didn't really pan
Yeah.
out showing anything for the team identity. Just kind of went to show that this is always a very like odd, memorable game. And then let's go to, and I'm sure we're missing a few of them in here, but then even in 2017, Auburn blows that just horrifically massive lead. They're up 20-0 on LSU, and then Auburn ends up blowing that lead. So there was
Oh
that.
wait, was the freaking, and what was it? Was it the John Vaughn? Wasn't that the was
Oh,
it?
yeah. How could we forget that? 2005, John Vaughn misses like five,
Okay, now I'm starting to get it. Now I'm getting kind of weirded out, actually.
yeah, 5 field goals. So actually, fun factor here, cousin of mine on my father's side, actually, his girlfriend at the time was living next door to John Vaughn. Like, their apartments were next door to each other. And he said he had to go and like help her clean the front door and window and bricks of her apartment because so many people went over there and like egged it and threw trash and just all, like basically vandalized his apartment for that game. And she
Yeah.
just got like the blowback of just the mass trash protest of Vaughn for that. So yeah, 05 he missed because that was essentially a layup win for Auburn, but he missed all those field goals. You're
And
right. There was another one.
that's a shame, obviously, that it happened. But he absolutely redeemed himself against Georgia.
Yeah, no,
Uh,
I mean John Vaughn, I mean his career overall was
yeah.
so there was that, and like I said, we had the comeback game in 2017, 2018, just an absolutely brutally hot game, just melt the soles of your shoes. That was the very questionable like pass interference calls in the fourth quarter that I still will maintain to this day that those are incredibly uncatchable. That just gave LSU 30 free yards and essentially kind of gifted them a touchdown to win that one. And that was when everybody thought Burrow sucked. And then 2019, of course, one of the best SEC teams ever. Auburn plays them the closest out of anybody. And had maybe Derek Brown not got held to oblivion, maybe Auburn wins that game. If you go back, I will still never forget the screenshots. I mean, that was just some of the most egregious, uncalled holdings I think I've
Yeah.
ever
Okay.
seen
Yeah. Yeah.
in a
Yeah.
football game in my
I think.
life.
Yeah. I took some screenshots of that one.
Yeah,
Yep.
I mean, Derek
That's
Brown was
coming
just
back to
like
me.
Derek Brown just getting manhandled out. I mean, you see refs staring at him and then just
Yeah. I
whistles
mean,
completely
arms are just,
swallow.
yeah, just entirely wrapped around him. Yeah.
Yeah, and then 2020, you get that's the down of the Coach O. They just kind of revenge game. You beat the brakes off of them. COVID. Then you add the TJ Finley sprinkle in there to make it a little more. And then You have the 2021 game, of course. You know, the bow. You get the Baton Rouge monkey off your back. And then last year's game was just this good old fashioned Brian Harsin loss. Nothing too crazy out of there. But needless to say, it's hard to go about 2 or 3 years in a row without something very memorable happening. So we'll see if this year will sort of continue the tradition of that. And like I said, I'm sure there's a year or two in there. Someone's going, oh, you remember? Oh wait, so and so happened. So we'll leave it for the listeners. If there's something that we missed or a memory that was not coming back, shoot us a DM. Let us know. We will bring it up in another preview show. But kind of, I want to talk about moving forward a little bit to wrap this up. As we kind of said, and you said, remind you of the shirt. I'll remind you of the shirt. But with realignments, obviously this is a very cherished rivalry, and it has a rivalry that produces a lot of memories, headlines, whatever you want to call it. Is this one of those rivalries that we feel that could potentially be, because we're not playing them next year? I mean, they've already said that, but we haven't moved to a 9 game yet. Do you start to lose some of the luster of a rivalry like this if you take it away to, at best case, every other year in certain scenarios? Who knows how long the gap may be between it? And then could this be something similar to what Auburn, Florida lost when they played that game so far apart?
Yeah, I mean, I think there are plenty of rivalries, whatever our annual folks that we could lose, and I don't think anybody would even notice. But or at least close to it. But I do think this one, because of, again, all the branding that has gone into it, because of the lore that has been built up, that just gets celebrated every year. Apparently rightfully so, now that I'm going back through through all these things. I think this is going to be one, and that will be kind of felt, because you're right. I mean, we met them sporadically over the decades, up until there was some in the 80s, and then the 90s definitely got going. But it has become like a really big deal, and it usually has some pretty big implications because of just how the programs have gone. I think this would be a good question to really ask LSU people. And I'll tell you why. And I think, though, as much as it would kind of stink, it will, I guess, be a loss for like Auburn fans. For LSU fans, it might even be a bigger deal. And I say that because, you look at the earthquake game, for again, so-called, but I think the blog is still around. I could be wrong, but years ago, when Sports Blog Nation, SB Nation, got going and kind of sucked up all these these different team blogs.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, LSU's blog, what's it called?
Tiger Bait?
No, it's called And the Valley Shook.
Oh,
right.
Okay.
Now, unless I'm wrong, I mean, that's a direct reference to the 1988 Auburn game, right? As if like this is like the moment. And I mean, there were quotes to it at the time. I mean, LSU doesn't have like a big in-state rival. I mean, they got their Ole Misses, they got their whatever Arkansas.
But yeah, they made up a I think my favorite thing is like manufactured rivalries, like coming up with this boot thing for Arkansas just to give them somebody
right. And I mean, so I think, that it was a really big deal for them, like at the time. And I mean, here you go. You gotta, whomever those dudes were who started that thing, there was at least a generation of LSU fans that deemed this like some kind of tradition defining win. And the idea that, again, that there was this once, that they were the sole recipients of this manifestation of football gods. And then also, like you said, I mean, even with the shirt, I mean, is there an Auburn beat LSU shirt anywhere? I mean, maybe, but you got an LSU fan wearing a LSU beat Auburn shirt for every day of his life, 20 years ago. Like it might affect that side of things more than it might affect us. It's always been it has been the last 20, 30 years, especially the last 20 years. I mean, it really has been one. It has been a great game. It has been a hard game. It's always been an important game, a big ticket game. Like, oh, do. Okay, you got LSU tickets. You got LSU tickets. I mean, behind Bama and Georgia. I mean, it's got to be LSU right now in terms of games. In terms of like, okay, what's and so it is. I hadn't really been thinking about it until now, but I am. It is going to be weird not having that as an every year thing. Maybe who knows? Maybe it'll enhance it. Maybe it'll be like a thing like, okay, we're back, and Lord knows what kind of crazy thing is going to happen now, or I don't know. But like you said, I know you compared it kind of like to the Florida rivalry, which once upon a time was like a really huge thing, and there was always some extra angles with that. There was in the '80s, there was the Emmett Smith stuff. There was some sort of bad blood, forgotten bad blood issues that I can't get into. I can't really think about. It was a T-shirt that somebody made back then, but and obviously the Spurrier days, and
You had the Urban,
so
and
in
it kind of
Urban,
fizzled out with the
again
Urban
in
stuff.
Urban, and so there. I mean that one going away. Um, certainly it was weird when we came back after like a 9 year, been like 9 years or something since we played Florida, and it was kind of I remember it kind of being weird.
Yeah, it was like 2019. I think it was 2011 to 2019
Yeah,
was
yeah,
the gap. And I mean, there's definitely like a medium ground here that I think you got to hit. And this is a debate we can definitely have for another episode. I think it's going to be a very hot topic for many more months. I want to kind of tease it here and just let everybody know to tune in, because this will be something we take a deeper dive into, because I think it's a very, very interesting topic from a fan and a lore perspective. But going that many years without playing Florida, like I don't think like that kind of sucks for everybody. But
yeah,
and going not every year playing LSU, I think that's going to also have some sting to it. And I don't know if it's if you play them every other year at worst, will it kind of keep that riding? If it's once every 3 years, will that kill it? And then obviously if it's anything more than that, then I think you really
yeah,
lose the rivalry. And are you going to be seeing it with all these others? I think they'll probably go to a 9-game situation in 2025, and it'll get better once they get the TV
yeah,
contract stuff worked out, and this will sort of take care of it. But it's just one of those things where I don't know. I don't have the answer of the internal debate of, is it better to have your core rivals and play them more often, or do you kind of lose that as often, but you get a little bit more of everybody in there to kind of help?
yeah,
Maybe your main fire is not as big, but you got more others burning. I don't know.
yeah,
And that's something that I think we're going to think a lot about, because I mean, that's something we got to start processing on the horizon, because I think you see a lot of teams that lose their lose their rivals and jump conferences and do all these other things. I think it really takes a lot of the luster away from their program, and props to the SEC for really keeping it from a geographical proximity. And that's something I will say. You will hear it here. You'll hear me say this many, many other times. But what makes rivalry so special is that geographic proximity, because you can drive to each other's games. You're interacting with the fans in the wild. Like, why do I want to hate LSU? Well, it's because I see enough of their fans and interact with them in person or on the internet. Like, and it just puts fuel on that fire. So I want to go to those games. I want to watch them on TV. I want to see them lose in person, because it gives me that much more joy, because I'm constantly dealing with them in the wild. If you take that
right,
away, like let's say Auburn versus Oregon, for example, this kind of makeshift natty 2019 style, called a rivalry, but grudge fest. Like, yeah, it's awesome. I think it's hilarious kind of what Auburn's done to Oregon in those two games, that they obviously not 2010, but even 2019, that sat real sour with them. But I'm not seeing Oregon fans daily, weekly, or even monthly. So it's like I can easily forget about that. It's not like I'm constantly interacting with them. And I think when you're seeing these conference realignments, people flying across the country, you're going to lose a lot of that. I think West Virginia is a great example of that, when they jump conferences and then they're playing, the Texases and the Oklahoma States and all these other deals, where it's just like their rivals pit. Their rivals, like Virginia is the Virginia. It's like the proximity rivals, and you don't have that anymore with them. So, all right. Well, I think Jeremy's feed may have jumped off, so that is actually going to probably conclude the episode. Wish he could say goodbye or hear me say goodbye to him. I'm assuming the phone overheated again. Once again, weird things happen on LSU week. But thank you everybody for tuning into this recap episode of kind of the strange history of Auburn and LSU. This is definitely one that we kind of were remembering. It was almost like a live trip down memory lane for all the strange history that these two teams have had with each other. And we will see how this continues on this weekend. And then we'll see how this rivalry looks moving forward once we see how the dominoes fall with conference realignment and 8 games, 9 games, and how they decide to do all that moving forward. So thank you guys for tuning into the Auburn Daily Show. Make sure to check out what they've got going on, theauburndaily.com. Follow them on Twitter at the Auburn Daily. And then you can check me out on Twitter at Auburn Memes. And of course, Jeremy is on Twitter at the War Eagle Reader. You can check out all these great stories more in depth that he has written extensively about at thewareaglereader.com. Thank you guys for listening. Have a good rest of your day and check us out for the next one coming tomorrow.